I know there is consciousness in the universe. I have one data point, myself. There's nothing I'm more certain of than the fact that I'm conscious. I believe that you're conscious, but I can't know for sure. I look at you and I see a human body and some behavior, and I guess if I opened up your skull, I'd find a brain inside, but none of that would be proof that you're actually subjectively experiencing the world like me. So this is to say it's at least logically consistent to suppose that you're a zombie, a walking, talking, biological organism with no consciousness going on inside, just like a robot or a computer or an automaton. Now, we don't think that other people are zombies. I don't actually think you're a zombie. I'm pretty sure you're conscious, but there's no direct observation that's going to make the difference between you and a zombie. So it's almost something at some level you got to take on faith or as a starting assumption.
The other thing I'm sure you have found, especially in talking with lay people, is you would say, well, we're doing a study on consciousness, a movie on consciousness, and they'll say, well, what is that? And then eventually you get down to, well, like pure awareness, just the act of awareness. Many people have never thought that that could be an object of study.
And talking about consciousness is kind of like asking a fish about the water. You know, it's so close to home. It's such an absolute part of everything we've ever been through in our existence that we can't really separate ourselves.
When we speak of consciousness, some people speak of conscious experience. Okay, some people also use the word unconscious processing of information. Other people talk about consciousness as a potentiality field. Other people refer to consciousness only when there is some mental or perceptual experience. The great Vedantic traditions describe consciousness as the ground of being, as the ground of existence.
Unconscious processes lead to consciousness. It's kind of a build-up, and then you're, in the case of our model, quantum superposition, unconscious processing reaches threshold for collapse. Bing, you have a moment of consciousness, awareness. Again, unconscious build-up, bing, unconscious build-up, bing. So you have a sequence of events that are consciousness happening at, let's say, 40 times per second, bing, 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 bing.
I think there are several possible definitions of consciousness that bear on different levels of processing at the brain level. We refer in science, in neuroscience in particular, to a rather simple version of consciousness, which is conscious access. The fact that when you look around, you only become aware of a subset of the information.
What we perceive, what we're consciously aware of, is approximately 1/1,000,000,000th of the information that is actually impinging upon us at any given time. And so a large part of what's happening in terms of brain processing is filtering out things that you don't need to attend to right now.
Well, at the center of all this is the hard problem of consciousness, which is how on earth does all this physical processing in the brain give you consciousness? And many people, including me, just see a gap in the explanation. My take on this is you actually need to end up taking consciousness as a kind of a fundamental constituent of the world, like space and time and mass. Find the fundamental laws that govern it. But that's just the start. We've got to find out what this fundamental theory is. One leading idea is panpsychism, the idea that consciousness is present everywhere at the ground level of matter. Even a photon has a little bit of consciousness, or an electron. Okay, that's fine as far as it goes, but it still doesn't solve the hard problem. So now the question is, how do all those little conscious photons and electrons or whatever add up to the kind of consciousness that I have?
This is an argument against panpsychism. If you're going to say the clock is conscious, then you have to say each screw is conscious. Then you got to say the hand is conscious. And you can't give a coherent account of consciousness on panpsychism. See, look around you. If everything is conscious, if you say, well, this glass is conscious, well, how about the molecules in the glass? Are they conscious? If so, how do they relate to the consciousness of the glass? And if they're not conscious, then why not? Why is the glass conscious and not the parts? So there is no a coherent version of panpsychism that I've ever seen. See, panpsychism says, well, consciousness is everywhere. But that's an incoherent notion, because by definition, consciousness comes in units. That's what I was trying to say. It's qualitative, unified fields of consciousness. And there's a point where my consciousness ends and yours starts.
There isn't any hard problem. The hard issue is to get people to see that it's not a problem at all. It's a cognitive illusion. And then show how, if you simply abandon the idea of a hard problem, you can make real progress, and a lot of progress is being made. We've had 20 years of philosophers doing metaphysics in the absence of science, showing exactly zero for what they've accomplished, which is what I predicted. Meanwhile, the serious science of consciousness has gone booming.
In my view, consciousness is not at all an illusion. It's a specific function which is brought to the brain by a certain high-level brain circuitry. It's an evolved function. It's a useful function for the brain. In fact, it's so useful that many animal species for millions of years have had it. And the specific function that I have in mind is the sharing of information. It's very useful for animals when they take decisions to bring together all the information that they have dispersed in many brain circuits and to put this information together in order to take the best decision. I want to take an example. For instance, imagine an elephant finding that there is no water at the current location, needs to walk across the savannah to try to find another place where there is water. It's extremely important for him to use all of the available information from memory, from what he sees, other animals do, and bring together all this information, which is stored in many different areas, in order to take the optimal decision, maybe walk 30 kilometers in the desert in a specific direction in order to find water. This is a life or death computation. It's very useful. It cannot be done by very specialized circuitry. You have to have this much more flexible architecture that allows you to consider various possibilities, various sources of information, ponder them. This is exactly what we call a conscious decision.
Tradition in science has been to think you really understand something when you reduce it to something else. Because you show that the table isn't really solid, it's just a cloud of molecules, and solidity has been reduced to the behavior of the molecules. Now, in a way, that's right, but in a way, it's wrong. You can't reduce anything that really exists, because once you've done that story about the cloud of molecules, all the same, this damn thing is solid.
The scientific method is a way of looking at things where you start with a hypothesis, and then there are various very strict ways that we proceed with the scientific method to knowing things. Scientific method is not a pathway to all truth. In fact, scientific method is extremely limited in what it can show us.
Current science is a notational, quantifying measurement of experience. It's the map, it's not the territory. You're not experiencing quanta right now. What you're experiencing is life in this moment, whether it's your thoughts, feelings, emotions, images, perceptions. So we should never forget that science is the map, it's not the territory, and it's only one form of map of experience. I experience love. How do I quantify that? Okay, I experience compassion, joy, equanimity, anger, hostility, Richard Dawkins. These are qualia experiences. Okay, and at this moment, there's no science for quantifying these.
One of the difficulties that we have in the field of consciousness studies is that we have to shed our old ideas of dualism. We all have this idea from our cultures, from our religions, even from the legal system, that the mind is different from the brain. It's very hard to fight this idea and to realize that mind and brain are two sides of the same coin. And I think, in particular, the philosophers' intuitions of qualia are a remnant of an intuition of dualism. The idea of qualia is really that whatever you explain at the brain level, there will always be this additional quality of experience, subjective experience, that you cannot explain. I think it's just a wrong intuition, and we would just have to realize slowly through scientific experiments that no, all the states of our conscious experience, all our states of mind relate to specific states of the brain.
I think when trying to study something as complex as consciousness, after all, what we're dealing with here is something that is asking questions about itself. That immediately raises issues because it's a recursive problem. We're trying to understand ourselves by thinking about ourselves. But ultimately, it really is a matter of physics.
There are physicists who are coming into the field of neuroscience, really learning the neuroscience, working with engineers, working with neuroscientists, and helping us do this thing which is very difficult, and that is putting together all of these data to make a coherent explanation.
Does biology lag far behind physics? No, not at all. In fact, I think biology is the right science to use to understand consciousness. The idea that fundamental physics comes into it is, I think, about as forlorn in the case of consciousness as it is in the case of free will. Biology is the science that shows what free will is and how it evolved, because it did evolve. There was no free will on this planet a billion years ago. There's lots of it now. Physics is just the same. It's not physics, it's biology.
If you think about free will not in some clever philosopher's way, in the ordinary human basic way, something like this: I'm in here, I have thoughts, and I control my body. I can lift my hand just because I want to, for no other reason. Not because of my brain's doing this, or my memes, or my genes, or whatever it is, just because I want to. That, I think, is what people mean by free will. It's free of all the conditions that go on in the brain and so on. Well, no. The more we learn about the brain, the less room there is for anybody in there who would have free will. And we can understand why here in prefrontal cortex decisions are made in a certain way, and their basal ganglia are involved, and the movements are coordinated in the motor strip. And, we can see this stuff going through the brain, multiple parallel systems. There's no middle where I could sit with my free will and interfere with it. It's multiple parallel things, controlling the hand movements, controlling the mouth. It's all just happening because it must happen because of the way the brain was just a moment ago, and what's happening here with these trees and the rustling and the birds and everything else. It's possible, because I've done it consistently through my life, to give up the sense of free will and simply say, she's doing what she's doing. It simply is happening because it must happen that way. And to take a sort of light-hearted interest in what will happen instead of trying to control the world. That, I think, is compatible with the science we understand of the brain. It's also what comes out of many meditation traditions, particularly in Buddhism. My own training, I'm not a Buddhist, but my own training is in Zen, which culminates in not doing. Because once you let go of the self who would be doing the doing and simply become one with what's happening, there's no doer. Now that's very far-fetched, and I certainly don't claim to have any great sort of spiritual progress in that sense. But I have tried all my life to not believe in free will because I can't believe in it, and the sensation has gone away. People find that very hard to understand or even believe, and they say, well, that can't be true, but I can only say it is.
Of course we have free will. I mean, everyone assumes they have free will, and I don't think it's an illusion. Even those who argue we don't have free will, usually they're materialists, presumably would think that they adopted the materialist theory and their theories about free will out of some kind of free choice. Otherwise, it's just their brain making them do it. And so if a materialist says, I've got no free will, and I'm a materialist, my consciousness is a kind of illusion, why should we believe them?
There's a sense in which I can understand why someone would say free will is an illusion, when what they mean is not that self-control is an illusion. They mean that the idea that there is this non-physical soul that creates a decision from nothing, that's an illusion.
The brain itself has limitations, and it creates your perceptual experience. What does the world look like to an insect with 100 eyes? What is the experience of a bat that navigates through the echo of ultrasound, or a dolphin that uses other frequencies of sound to navigate, or an underwater creature that has never come up and seen the light of the sun? So it's obvious that perceptual experience could not be absolute truth. It depends on the species, it depends on the brain, and therefore there must be something more fundamental to this that I see.
The only thing that I truly know exists in this universe is my own consciousness. And that is true for all of us. And important to remember that as much as we like to think that there's this outside world there and we're the observer, we simply witness the outside world, remember that our modern neuroscientific views would tell you, first and foremost, everything you've ever experienced, every single atom of experience you've ever had since before you were born, was nothing more than the flickering of 100 billion neurons, the electrochemical action of 100 billion neurons in a 3-pound gelatinous mass floating in a warm, dark bath. It's not reality itself. It's a model of something that we think is out there somewhere.
So my theory of consciousness is called the global neuronal workspace, and quite succinctly, it states that information which is conscious is information which is broadcasted throughout the cortex, so that multiple areas of the cortex are being informed of the corresponding content. So what we call being conscious is essentially having the information available to many of our brain processes. Unconscious information is processed in the cortex, in various areas of the cortex. We've shown, for instance, that an unconscious word will be processed for meaning in specific areas of the brain. But what's different about conscious information is that it does not stay confined in a specific circuit for processing the word, but the word gets broadcasted to many additional areas. And that's why when we are conscious of information, we can speak about it, we can remember it in the long term, we can act upon it in various ways. The information is essentially at our fingertips.
With regard to consciousness, we know that the brainstem, the thalamus, the cortex are all extremely important. This is already then a very complex story. And you fiddle with any one of those bits and you're going to get a change. But they have to operate in a kind of coordinated fashion in order to get the phenomenon. And what we don't know is what that coordination looks like.
Most people think that consciousness emerges from complex computation among neurons acting as fundamental units. We think that neurons are too large and we need to go to a lower level inside. For example, a single cell organism like a paramecium swims around, finds food, finds a mate, has sex, can learn. It's one cell, doesn't have any synapses. It uses its microtubules. So if a paramecium is that clever, I think our neurons should be as clever. And if you look inside neurons, they have microtubules which are capable of processing information.
Self-organizing systems have an organizing field within and around them. There's I'm a self-organizing system, for example, and there's a field within and around my body which shapes my form, that shaped me as an embryo as I was growing. That I call a morphic field. Morphic comes from the Greek word morphe, meaning form or shape. Then I'm supposing in this hypothesis of morphic resonance that these morphic fields have a kind of memory built into them. So every organism tunes into a kind of collective memory of the species.
I think we may be dealing with a phenomena which at present is hiding in plain sight. There are theories that suggest that what we think of as the sixth sense is actually the first sense. It's like the sentience that comes before all of the processing that goes on in the brain that turns it into the world as we experience it. There's some other way of grasping, like sentience grasps the universe in some way. And that then is turned into what we experience as humans by this organism. But the raw connection with the universe is there. It's always there.
So scientists are gathering a whole lot of data about the brain, about behavior. But then the question is, what does that tell us about consciousness? You've got to somehow go beyond the data to figure out what it's telling us. And people are isolating things like the neural correlates of consciousness and bits of the brain that seem to be active when we're conscious or when we're conscious in a particular way, but it doesn't seem to exactly add up to a theory.
If I went inside your body, there's nobody there. So who's the observer? Where is the observer? Why can't the observer be located? There are two ways of looking at that. Daniel Dennett would say the observer is a hallucination. So if the observer is an hallucination, then everything we observe must also be a hallucination, right? A phantom observer is observing a phantom universe. I think that's ridiculous. We have the experience of the observer, It's a qualia experience. The observer can't be found, it must be non-local. Okay? So that seems to me straightforward logic. If you can't locate the observer, then the observer is not in space-time. So all experience is actually being processed in a domain that is not in space-time, but gives us the perceptual experience of being in space-time.
I thought that Deepak's whole argument rested on a simple fallacy, namely, you can't observe anything without a conscious observer, therefore you can't separate the thing you're observing from the observation. You can, absolutely. That's what science does. Science makes a series of observations and then describes a reality that exists independently of the observations.
When we study conscious perception, I don't think we have necessarily to think about the self. This higher level of self-consciousness. When you are engaged in conscious perception, there is no need for the brain to at the same time re-represent that the information is being perceived by oneself. According to my view, the conscious perceiving brain is simply a brain where the information is becoming available, is broadcasted throughout the brain. There may or may not be additional circuits that look at this information from a second order point of view and realize, oh, I was conscious of this information. This is a second aspect, metacognitive awareness, self-knowledge of what I am conscious about, which may be present but need not be present in order to have a conscious perception.
And no one knows how memory works, yet it's almost universally assumed that it must be in the brain. I don't think it is in the brain. I think the brain's more like a TV receiver than a video recorder. I think we tune in to our memories. Now, if memories are stored in the brain, when you die, then clearly all your memories will be eliminated. All theories of survival of bodily death, whether they're in terms of reincarnation, rebirth, purgatory, going to sleep and then waking up for the last judgment, and there's a whole range of theories of life after death. All of these would be meaningless if memories stored in the brain and if all memories are eliminated at death, because all of them presuppose some kind of survival of memory.
There are a couple of reasonably well-known cases where someone floated out of their body as a result of being near death and saw something that they weren't able to see if they given the position they were in, and that's consistent with what we know about clairvoyance or non-local perception. So whether it says that something will then persist after death, if there's a continuity of consciousness, it actually doesn't say that at all. What we know about psychic phenomena as can be studied in the laboratory kind of points in the direction that maybe something exists, but it doesn't really, it doesn't go strongly in that direction.
I think when you actually look at the scientific work on near-death experiences, it tends to support the idea that brains under tremendous stress, particularly brains when they're deprived of oxygen, do weird things. They sometimes hallucinate. They sometimes have this narrowing so it looks like a tunnel that's going off to paradise. But it's almost certainly just a brain reaction.
Near-death experiences are not evidence of life after death. There is nobody to continue. The self is an ephemeral illusion constructed again and again in our lifetime. It just pops up and pops away again, pops up and pops away again, but we're deluded into thinking it's continuous. The near-death experience can shed light on this. As the brain is dying, that whole illusion begins to dismantle. You get these visual effects of the tunnel, you get the dissociation between body and the invented self, which then dissolves if the experience carries on into not being and can end up in a mystical experience of oneness, which many meditators are familiar with, a non-dual experience, when I am not separate from this and the whole problem of consciousness disappears. So in that sense, I would say near-death experiences, not black and white, they are hallucinations. They're wonderful, life-changing, spiritual hallucinations.
Consciousness is actually, in some fashion, imprisoned by the physical brain. And it brings to mind what are called filter theories, that the brain is more of a reducing valve or a filter, that basically dumbs down consciousness to this little trickle of the apparent here and now that we see. But what near-death experiences have been telling us for ages, and of course I never paid attention to that literature before my coma, and I've read it a whole lot since my coma, but what they've been trying to tell us for ages is that their awareness went to a far higher level as they were coming close to death.
How do large areas of the brain, big chunks of neural geography, create consciousness? Because those both work best on agents that are already conscious. So I mean, it's a lot of fun to do these. You know, you get the person in this big cigar-shaped thing, and they lie down in the MRI machine. I've done it, and you probably have too. And you got to lie real still, and so on. And then they get you to do certain things, and the brain lights up. That's terrific that it does that. But all of those are done on patients that are already conscious, on subjects that are already conscious. And it's very hard using those methods to figure out how does the brain create consciousness in the first place, and that's what we need to know.
Consciousness is just a functional property. It's what the brain does. It's an aspect of the brain's computations. And that computation, in principle, can be reproduced in a machine. And I think we begin to understand a little bit better what sort of machine should be built in order to have conscious states. It's a machine that should be extremely flexible, able to mobilize information in a transient manner in a workspace system, in this high-level decision system, and be able to fix its own goals independently, so have a lot of autonomy, and have an ongoing pattern of activation, always trying to solve more problems or to address more goals in a self-organized manner, independently of the outside world. Sometimes picking information in the outside world, but most of the time running on itself, having spontaneous patterns of activity. If we build such a machine, there is no reason why people would not call it being conscious. I don't think that consciousness is a magical property. It's not something that we need to add to the machine. It's something that the machine does, and if we come close enough to having a machine reproduce what the brain does, then everybody will agree that the machine is conscious.
Everything in science has a frontier in it. We have not closed the book on anything. But when it comes to major puzzles about the nature of who and what we are, and more importantly, everything we know in science, in our human experience, whatever, it all devolves down to consciousness. Because if you were not aware, by definition, none of us would be aware of anything. We'd all be robots.
We've got a science going which is making incremental progress on a bunch of problems. It's not just a whole bunch of big, wild, crazy ideas, but people getting out there and developing experimental paradigms for looking at the neural correlates, contrasting the conscious and the unconscious. And every conference, there's a few advances on the one before. I think we're probably still one or two really big ideas short of the final theory, but at least we're making incremental progress in that direction. You know, I'd be surprised if we've got a theory of consciousness that's kind of analogous, say, to the Watson and Crick theory of the gene in the next 10 or 20 years, but I'd be disappointed if we don't have one in the next, say, 100.
What is fundamental reality? It must be something that very precisely, with exquisite mathematic precision, creates both the brain and the cosmos. And not this brain and the cosmos, infinite varieties of brains and cosmos. The cosmos is using the brain as an observation deck to experience itself in this form, okay, color, sound, touch, taste, and smell, the human experience.
I would say one thing, I've changed my mind big time before. I was a believer in all paranormal phenomena as a teenager in my early 20s. Telepathy, clairvoyance, life after death, precognition, all of it. It was the evidence that made me change my mind and take this totally different view, as well as my meditation practice and other experiences I've had that led me to it. So I would change my mind if that happens. We shall see.
Are we like machines, subject to our genes? Is this just a meme I've become? what it means. Is it as it seems? Is this just a dream to wake from? Is this just a dream to break through? Is this just a dream? Is this just a dream to wake from? Is this just a dream?